I just revealed something the world has never seen before. A few weeks ago, Israel obtained half a ton of Iran's secret nuclear weapons files. You want to see what that looks like? This is an exact copy of the material we got from Iran's secret atomic archive. That's over 100,000 original Iranian files and documents of blueprints for nuclear bombs, timelines for uranium enrichment, simulation of nuclear implosion, much more. This atomic archive proves one thing: Iran lied through its teeth. Of Saddam's attempts to conceal and deceive the world, to conceal the efforts that he's making at producing weapons of mass destruction. We in Israel have known this for a long time. We've shared this intelligence with the United States.
To understand JFK's assassination, first you need to understand Israel's nuclear program. Israel gave the United States false intelligence about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction, and now Bibi's saying the same thing about Iran. But it gets worse. Bibi has the chutzpah to tell the United States to invade countries because of their nuclear programs. Meanwhile, he stole nuclear technology from the United States. They cry out in pain as they stab you in the back. Richard Kelly Smythe was sentenced to 40 months in prison. He was president of Milco, a company that worked with NASA. He obtained nuclear triggers and sent them to Hilai Trading Company in Israel. One of his contacts in Hilai was Bibi Netanyahu. Hilai was owned by Israeli arms dealer Arnon Milchan, who went all over television admitting details of the nuclear smuggling ring.
Today, the 68-year-old, now chairman of New Regency Films, is worth more than $4 billion and apologizes for nothing.
I should have said, you know what? I did it for my country and I'm proud of it.
Can you imagine if a Russian got caught smuggling nuclear technology, then said, "Fuck you, I did it for my country"? They would spend years in prison. Another example of Jewish privilege. Milchan is also a Hollywood producer. He produced the Medusa Touch in 1978, which featured an airplane flying into a building. In 1979, journalist Mike Evans met with the former head of Israeli intelligence, Isser Harel, and asked him if terror would ever come to America. Harel responded, "Yes, I fear it will come. I believe the first terror attack will be New York City's tallest building." Isser Harel, Israel's first spy master, said this in 1979. And Arnon Milchan, the Israeli spy, featured the same thing in a 1978 film.
So I wrote a book in 1995, and I said that if the West doesn't wake up to the suicidal nature of militant Islam, the next thing you'll see is the militant Islam is bringing down the World Trade Center.
The idea of disclosure. Iran won't tell the truth. We had to go in there, is Israel's position, and steal this information so we can know the truth. Disclosure as an issue should work every way. The United States should say what it has. You know where I'm going with this. A yes-no question for you. Does Israel have nuclear capabilities and nuclear weapons? Yes or no?
We've always said that we won't be the first to introduce it, so we haven't introduced it.
But that's not an answer to the question. Do you have them or do you not?
Of any country. It's as good an answer as you're going to get. But I'll tell you one thing, Chris, and I think it's important. Iran signed the NPT.
Yes, and Israel hasn't. U.S. aid to Israel is illegal because they are a nuclear power who has not signed the NPT, The US taxpayer has given Israel over $250 billion in welfare. This is illegal and it has to stop. In 2015, President Obama declassified documents revealing Israel's nuclear program. In 2008, former President Jimmy Carter said that Israel has over 150 nuclear weapons. In 2016, former Secretary of State Colin Powell said that Israel has 200 nuclear warheads pointed at Iran. Israeli nuclear technician Mordechai Benunu was sentenced to 18 years in prison for giving details of Israel's nuclear reactor in Dimona to the London Sunday Times. Dr. Avner Cohen, who worked for the Israeli government in religious affairs, wrote a book about Israel's nuclear reactor in Dimona, and he couldn't enter the country for several years.
Do you acknowledge that Israel has nuclear weapons?
I'm not. You can go read the newspapers about that.
You can't acknowledge that Israel has nuclear weapons, sir.
It is a well-known fact that Israel has nuclear weapons, but the Israeli government doesn't officially talk about what kinds of weapons and where, etc.
In 2016, Germany sold 3 nuclear submarines to Israel. Israel now has submarines that could destroy entire nations. Israeli military historian Martin van Creveld admitted that Israel has nukes targeting Europe. If it went on much longer, the Israeli government would lose control of the people. In campaigns like this, the anti-terror forces lose because they don't win, and the rebels win by not losing. I regard a total Israeli defeat as unavoidable. That will mean the collapse of the Israeli state and society. We'll destroy ourselves. But would the world permit such ethnic cleansing? That depends on who does it and how quickly it happens. We possess several hundred atomic warheads and rockets and can launch them at targets in all directions, perhaps even at Rome. Most European capitals are targets for our Air Force. Let me quote General Moshe Dayan. Israel must be like a mad dog, too dangerous to bother. I consider it all hopeless at this point. We shall have to try to prevent things from coming to that, if at all possible. Our armed forces, however, are not the 30th strongest in the world, but rather the 2nd or 3rd. We have the capability to take the world down with us, and I can assure you that that will happen before Israel goes under.
Israel was determined to have a last line of defense it could rely on.
The notion is that Israel should have capability for the worst case scenario. In order to prevent Auschwitz and the memory of Auschwitz and the respect to Auschwitz, Israeli leaders felt that Israel should be in position to threaten with Hiroshima. And if, God forbid, Israel would have to face that kind of eventuality, Israel would have a weapon of last resort. That's what people call the Samson option.
The Samson option owed its name to the Jewish hero who killed many of the Israelites' enemies as he brought about his own death.
These are psychopaths. When they go down, they're taking whoever they can with them. But before the Samson option, they will use kill switches. This is something that former Unit 8200 goes into detail about in this Vice documentary listed. For years, JFK demanded inspections into Israel's nuclear reactor in Dimona. Prime Minister Ben-Gurion kept delaying the inspections. Then finally, JFK threatened to end support for Israel. Instead of allowing the inspection, Ben-Gurion resigned. JFK wrote a letter to new Prime Minister Levi Eshkol, once again threatening to end support for Israel. Next thing you know, Kennedy was assassinated, and no president since then has tried to stop Israel's nuclear program.
And then there's the assassination of United States President Kennedy in '63. We want to know who killed him and why. There was someone called Lee Harvey Oswald, who was then killed by one Jack Ruby. Why did he kill him? Jack Ruby, an Israeli, killed Lee Harvey Oswald, who killed Kennedy. Why did this Israeli kill Kennedy's killer? Then Jack Ruby, the killer of Kennedy, die in mysterious circumstances before he could be tried. We must open the files. The whole world knows that Kennedy wanted to investigate the Israeli Dimona nuclear reactor. This involves international peace and security and weapons of mass destruction. That is why we should open this file.
When President Kennedy was assassinated here in Dallas, Abraham Zapruder was standing on this concrete parapet with an 8mm camera. And with that camera, he recorded the tragedy. Mr. Zapruder, certainly no one had a better view of the assassination than you did.
Our purpose was to document the event.
In 2017, the US government released classified JFK assassination documents. Name of individual, Homer Echevarria. Reason for PRS interest, November 1963. Informant advised Chicago office that subject was a member of anti-Castro Cuban group. Subject allegedly approached informant to provide machine guns for Cuban revolution. November 21st, 1963. Subject allegedly told informant, "We now have plenty of money. Our new backers are Jews. As soon as we or they take care of Kennedy." The anti-Castro Cuban wasn't lying. Jim Garrison, the district attorney involved in the JFK investigation, told Playboy in a 1976 interview that Jewish mobster Jack Ruby smuggled arms to Cuban exile groups. Not just the CIA, but the Jewish mob also had interest in arming these Cuban exile groups. When Batista was in charge of Cuba, it was Las Vegas by the sea. Top Jewish American mobster Meyer Lansky put a lot of money into Cuba. But then Castro took over, shut down the casinos, and the mob lost big time. The Jewish mob played an important role in creating the State of Israel. They sent guns to Jewish terrorist groups in Palestine, such as Irgun, Stern Gang, and Haganah. Those guns were used to murder British officers and drive Palestinians off their land. Jewish mobster Myron Sugarman admits this in the video listed. He calls himself the last Jewish gangster, but that is not accurate. Today, the Jewish mob is alive and well, and they run Donald Trump. He does whatever they tell him to do. He's actually been in bed with them his entire career. It wasn't just the anti-Castro Cuban who bragged about JFK being killed beforehand. Jack Ruby's crew also bragged about it. Jim Garrison told Playboy, "I will give you one bit of evidence, recently uncovered by our office, that links Ruby to the conspiracy." 4 days before the assassination, on November 18th, 1963, a young woman from Dallas, named Rose Sharami, was thrown from a moving car on a highway outside Eunice, Louisiana. She was badly bruised and taken to the East Louisiana Hospital in Jackson, Louisiana. When she came out of sedation, on November 19th, she was distraught and sobbed that she had been thrown out of the car by associates of a man named Jack Ruby in Dallas. She claimed to have been sent by Ruby from Dallas to Miami to pick up a shipment of narcotics. When asked by a hospital attendant, who fortunately took notes of her remarks in case the police had to be called in, why she had been hurled from the car, she replied that narcotic smuggling was one thing, but she drew the line at murder. The president, she said, was going to be killed in Dallas within a few days. At this point, sadly enough, the hospital authorities seemed to dismiss her as hysterical and lost interest in her story. No one believed her until it was too late. While JFK was demanding inspections into Dimona, his brother Robert Kennedy was head of the Justice Department, demanding that the American Zionist Council register as a foreign agent. The American Zionist Council went on to become AIPAC, which dominates the US political system today. Robert wanted to regulate the Israeli lobby. He ran for president, then was murdered by a Palestinian who didn't remember carrying out the act.
Senator Robert F. Kennedy assassinated minutes after winning the California presidential primary. He was allegedly shot by this man, Sirhan Sirhan, a 24-year-old Palestinian immigrant. Sirhan was convicted of Kennedy's murder in 1969, but this morning, nearly 50 years later, Kennedy's son, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., tells the Washington Post that after reviewing autopsy results for months, he met with Sirhan in prison for 3 hours, walking away convinced Sirhan did not kill his father. One major discrepancy in the reports, Sirhan had a revolver that held only 8 bullets, but audio recovered from the scene reportedly recorded as many as 13 gunshots. Paul Schrade, a campaigner working for Kennedy, was one of the 5 other people who were hit by gunfire that night.
Sirhan was out of position, out of bullets, and could not have shot Robert Kennedy. My demand is a new investigation, an investigation of the second gunman, dead or alive, that they had never done and refused to do and didn't do back in 1968 and 69.
So what has led you to conclude that there was someone other than Sirhan who was shooting at Robert Kennedy?
Yes, we've concluded that Sirhan not only did not shoot Senator Kennedy, but could not have shot Senator Kennedy. And the reason for that is Sirhan was never in a position where he could shoot Senator Kennedy from behind, and Senator Kennedy was shot 4 times from behind.
Renewed hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas in the Gulf of Tonkin have today required me to order the military forces of the United States to take action in reply.
After JFK was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson became president. Johnson was a puppet for Israel. He allowed Israel to attack the USS Liberty. The ship was flying an American flag, and Israel fired on it for 2 hours, dropping napalm, burning American servicemen alive. They even shot the life rafts. The USS Liberty was able to get a signal out and call for help, but Johnson and McNamara ordered the Sixth Fleet to stand down. Johnson lied about what happened on the Gulf of Tonkin to start a bombing campaign in Vietnam. Meanwhile, Israel attacks the USS Liberty, murdering 34 Americans and wounding over 170 others, and Johnson does absolutely nothing. This was an act of war.
In truth, if the United States held Israel to the same standards that it has applied to Iraq, Serbia, and other countries, American bombers and missiles would be blasting Tel Aviv, and American officials would be putting Israeli leaders behind bars for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
In JFK's diary, which was auctioned off, he wrote, "After visiting these 2 places, you can easily understand how that within a few years, Hitler will emerge from the hatred that surrounds him now as one of the most significant figures who ever lived. He had boundless ambition for his country, which rendered him a menace to the peace of the world. But he had a mystery about him in the way that he lived and in the manner of his death that will live and grow after him. He had in him the stuff of which legends are made." Hitler, JFK, and Gaddafi had boundless ambition for their countries, and it cost them their lives. There is a world order in place, and you must do as you're told. Israeli nuclear technician Mordecai Benunu, who spent 18 years in prison, said that Israel was behind JFK's assassination. If JFK ended US support for Israel, that would mean the end of the Jewish state. Jack Ruby, who killed Oswald to silence him, attended services at Congregation Cherith Israel. His rabbi, Hillel Silverman, visited him in prison, and Ruby said, "I did it for the Jewish people."
You know what? I did it for my country, and I'm proud of it.
Milchan also produced the 1991 film JFK, which avoided all the important details. They have you focusing your attention on what they want you to believe. Just like they want you to believe that Muslims orchestrated 9/11. In the 1978 film, Milchan featured an airplane crashing into a building, similar to what we saw on 9/11. In 1995, his employee, Bibi, wrote a book about militant Islam bringing down the World Trade Centers. Milchan also produced Fight Club, featuring this in 1999.
Trust me, everything's gonna be fine.